Thank you for coming to the 12th Annual MarkMonitor Forum. We greatly appreciate your participation. Thanks for making it to our interesting new venue here, which I think has a lot of history. And hopefully today you'll leave the event doing a little networking, perhaps learning something new. And I think we really appreciate everybody coming out. You know, I think we've done, as I said, 12 of these events now. We're really excited about everybody's willingness to participate, to come to these events and share ideas. And I believe, and the company and the community, I think, believes that it's a big part of protecting your brands, your IP, and your customers. We have a very exciting lineup of topics, speakers covering best practices, business intelligence, events in the industry like GDPR that have impacted us, and a whole lot more. Before I get going, I want to just mention a few housekeeping items. There is a bag for each one of you, a green bag out there, and inside that bag is actually a survey. And so if you could take a moment at some point today to fill that out and return it, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us drive the content, try to make these events as entertaining and interesting and informative for you as possible. So if you could do that, we'd greatly appreciate it. In addition, we've added a sort of side breakout session during lunch today, which is with Staten Hammock, our VP of Policy and Industry Development, as well as Nancy Merritt, to discuss with all of you some of your visions and desires as it relates to some of the business problems that we're focused on and the products that we're building, and some of the strategic elements around that. And so that should be a fairly interesting session. I mean, we're thirsty for some of your feedback. So, and that'll actually be here in the auditorium at about 12:45. We'll announce that again later as we get closer to that event. Also, restrooms on either side as well through the exit sign there. We are using Slido. And if anybody has attended one of our events previously, you know this is a technology we like to use. If you've never used it before, you can go to the Slido website. You can also download the actual mobile app and use the event code you see on the screen behind me. And that'll enable you to participate in some of these survey questions that we like to do, and that actually compiles and presents the responses to those questions in real time. So we all get an opportunity to take a look at that as well. So if you wouldn't mind participating, we'd really appreciate it. So 12 years, a lot's changed since we started doing the MarkMonitor Forum. 12 years, I think, doesn't sound like a long time, certainly feels like a long time, I think, in the internet landscape. I wanted to cover some of the changes that have occurred in the last 12 years. Just some key observations impacting our space, the world at large, and some key lessons we've learned from working with almost 2,000 brand owners over the last decade plus. So back in 2006, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was about 11,800. And today, 12 years later, it's over 26,000. So that's pretty incredible growth. In October 2006, Google bought a scrappy UGC video platform for the rock bottom price of $1.65 billion. At the time, YouTube was getting about 100 million videos viewed every day on their website, and 72 million people each month were visiting YouTube. By 2017, 300 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. 5 billion videos are watched on YouTube every single day. And over 1.8 billion visitors visit YouTube each and every month. That is not bad growth for 11 years. Also in October 2006, with sanctions increasing and really the brink of war, supposedly at that time, North Korea decided to launch what was the first of 6 nuclear weapons tests that month. Today, obviously, it's a very different story. Today, a truly unimaginable scene compared to 12 years ago, the President of the United States and the dictator of North Korea hand in hand during their Singapore summit in June 2018. So quite a dramatic shift. So while Facebook was created in about 2004 in Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room, by 2006, Facebook had opened up its social network to the world. No longer did you need to be a student at a university anymore. Anyone over the age of 13 with an email address could sign up for the platform. By the end of 2006, 12 million people had joined Facebook. By October 2007, that number climbed to 50 million people. That's pretty astonishing growth in and of itself. If the company had just stopped right there, that's a pretty amazing success story. Today, there's about 2.3 billion people who access Facebook on a monthly basis. Truly astonishing in a very short period of time. So, relatively speaking, for our industry, I think e-commerce is one of the biggest drivers of the health of our brand. And it's also a driver for a lot of the abuse and the brand protection problems that we face every day together. And e-commerce continues to drive economic output for the United States. Grew by 2% year over year, from 14% growth to 16% growth just here in the United States. Today, 13% of all retail sales in the United States are e-commerce, which is pretty amazing. And the most dominant force in that space, most would agree, is Amazon. In 2013, Amazon was 20% of all USA e-commerce sales. Today, it's 28%. In real dollar terms, that's $129 billion worth of commerce versus just $52 billion 4 years prior. It's incredible. So, the evolution of the consumer experience, commerce, that's driving our economy. Starting in the late 19th century, different unique elements of society were driving that activity, meaning why people spend their money and buy your products and services. The first phase of this, from about 1890 to 1940, represented a time when economic activity was being driven primarily by demographics through tools like physical catalogs. I'm not sure any of us have seen one of those in quite a while. Merchants like Sears Roebuck really dominated the space. Phase two, from the 1940s to the 1990s, really was the introduction of brand-based marketing, rising product inventory and choice, and customer loyalty that was driven by having shopping moments, as they were referred to. So a shopping moment at that time happened in a department store or a mall. Phase three, really from the 1990s through about 2010 or so, saw an explosion of transactional-based commerce activity, obviously driven by internet adoption, and customers' desire for massive product and service selection to choose from. You may also notice that phase three, the utility phase, was only about 2 decades, while previous phases were more like 5 decades in length. So the time that we spend as a society and as consumers within each one of these phases is clearly accelerating over time. Today, post-2010, consumers want it all. They want unlimited inventory, truly unique shopping experiences, instant gratification, and now it must all be curated, personalized, and available 24/7. Instacart is an interesting service that has quite a few of these elements. It's an excellent example of combining the most valuable portions of each phase of the actual commerce journey that we described, from local merchants, finding local merchants, comparing pricings and savings and coupons, see what my friends bought, pay seamlessly, and then share what I did, all within the same mobile application, all within minutes. Simple, easy-to-use products are absolutely pervasive today. And the complexity around a lot of the products that we've created as technology companies in the space is really evaporating, almost all of which really are designed to facilitate commerce activity to the movement of money or the digestion of media content in order to build a successful strategy online and protect your customers and your brands. We must truly understand how our target audience, again, your customers we're trying to protect, find us and interact with us. Social in particular is an area where commerce is blending with almost every aspect of the space. And the quantity of time that your customers are spending on these services is much greater today than it was before. WeChat, which is arguably one of the fastest growing communication platforms on the planet, grew to over 1 billion monthly active users in less than 3 years. With services like this now ingrained in the everyday life of our customer, our well-intentioned customer that we're trying to protect, how can we afford to ignore any of these platforms? How can we afford to ignore any of these areas? Brand abuse threats and trademark infringement and fraud are blending together more than ever. They're overlapping. And this is being driven, we think, by several factors, but notably the value of your data and the data of your customers. Your data is now the single most attractive asset to fraudsters. Brand abuse, domain infringements, social media scams, they're all now truly about one single thing: taking your customers' data and your company's data. There were a lot of unintended consequences this year, and I think we could have a whole day to just talk about GDPR. Obviously, this impacts all of us, whether you're working in the domain management side of the industry or brand monitoring, enforcement, or fraud. There are always unintended consequences to broad-based legislation. Later today, we're going to have a great session with Statton to talk about this topic more specifically, how we think it's impacting us, and how we think it may be impacting you as well. Experience is priceless, and as a vendor in this space in particular, we're very proud of our experience. We think it's taught us a lot about the internet landscape, how consumers, again, I keep using this term, well-intentioned consumers, and we'll talk more about that later. But we've learned a lot about how they find you. And just as important, how they digest your products, interact with your brand, and the type of abuse that they're facing. 24 million marketplace takedowns, certainly indicates we know the space a little bit. We've done a lot of research as well on the space. Much of it you've all seen. We publish quite a few different white papers, something called a barometer report. We've got a new one that we're publishing in just a couple weeks. And so what we've learned from a lot of this research is a variety of things, but some of the key things we think that are quite interesting: 92% of search engine traffic never ventures beyond page 1. So that's a very interesting metric to us. Again, we want to protect your brand. We want to protect your consumers and your revenue. We need to know where your brand and your customers are interacting. 85% of marketplace traffic never goes past the first 5 pages. For our new barometer report, and again, that'll be available in the next couple of weeks to everyone who'd like to see it, we again found really interesting facts, and we polled hundreds and hundreds of people to compile the data and the research. 72% of the consumers say that brand protection has gained more attention. 82% of the professionals that we talked to agreed that cybersecurity threats are really at the forefront now of what they're discussing at the C-level within their organizations. So what we wanted to do is share some of the best practices that we think are important based on the research and based on the experience that we've had. The first one really is something that I've been talking a lot about for the last several years, which is if you're in the brand protection business, or that's part of your role at your company, the total quantity of enforcements is not necessarily directly related to the effectiveness of your program. Breadth's important. fraudsters tend to switch between various channels. And so making sure we don't have a lot of blind spots in terms of how we're going to monitor the internet is important. If you get very good, and I hate to single out Richard in particular from Adobe, but he's going to talk a little bit later, and I think, their program is a great example of taking a fairly broad approach, but having laser focus on solving that problem, and then moving on to the next area and the next actual priority. Don't miss the business intelligence opportunity here. By studying what's going on in your program and understanding how the bad guys are behaving and how your brand is being abused online, there are real market opportunities to be found there. And lastly, we think if you're going to do brand protection and do it effectively, you really have to see what your customer sees. Platforms are all using localization now. Your phone knows where you are right now in this room. So if you're going out on the internet and you're looking for abuse and you're looking to create a healthy environment for your customer, and that customer is in Japan or Latin America or Antarctica, wherever they might be, we have to see content through their eyes to understand the impact that we're having and whether or not we're truly creating a healthier environment for them. Who is the well-intentioned consumer? They're looking for authentic products and experiences. They want Adobe software. They want to find the brand that they're looking for. They're typing it in. They're downloading your app. They're taking steps to specifically interact with you as the brand. They're contributing significantly to the equity of your company. And they want genuine experiences. So, really quick, some bullet points that we think everyone should keep in mind when you're building out a program or evaluating the program that you already have underway. Localized search is key. As I said, everyone's using localization. If you're going to monitor websites or look for domain infringements or really focus on that space, and you're going out to Google and you're typing in your brand from Seattle, you're not going to see what a consumer sees in Brazil or Japan. So having the ability to be local in terms of your perspective into the content is the only way to ensure you see what that consumer sees. Keyword expertise is more important than ever, and local search habits. We rely heavily, for instance, on our Shanghai office when we're searching the internet in China and looking for problems throughout Asia, because you have to use the right keywords, the right terminology. I know this sounds fairly elementary, but I can tell you from my own experience being with MarkMonitor for 15 years, the majority of the vendors that we know about in the space and the technologies that are available are not doing this, Understand ranking and placement of content. If you have 10 websites that all infringe on your brand, you can certainly look at traffic statistics. That's helpful. There's a lot of things you can look at. One of the things that we think now is critical is understanding how many consumers can find this website. Is it indexed on page 1? Is it indexed on page 10? What's the probability my consumers are going to be impacted by this? I need an ability to measure that. Utilizing native marketplace searching with proxies and virtual machines is the only way to see what a consumer sees in that space. We've also looked a lot at various types of machine learning and threat level analysis, so we can try to build some technologies that are a little bit smarter in terms of anticipating the problems that we'd like to pursue. It's all about boiling the ocean, finding what's relevant as quickly as possible, processing it, and moving forward. There's way too much content to approach this in a manual ad hoc process. And then really, partnering. Partnering is critical, and it's a big part of why we have the event today. It's a big part of why we attend a lot of events ourselves. We want to partner with you, with law enforcement, with all of the entities within the community to try to build the strongest potential programs that we can. This is just a quick example of localization and I think why it's important. If you go out to Taobao, you do a search from my office in San Francisco, I get one result. I do the same search through the MarkMonitor platform, and I find obviously a whole lot more content because our platform is utilizing localization, right? It's approaching the platform and harvesting the data using a local IP address. Now, whether you work with MarkMonitor or you work with someone else or you build a program internally, with your own team, it doesn't matter. I think these lessons are important, and you should keep them in mind irrespective. Whoops. Ranking and placement was something I'd also mentioned. So knowing where the content is. You know, you used to look at, well, this guy's got 100 listings, or he has 5 websites. You know, let's look at traffic data. Let's look at some of these other sort of static data elements that we've got access to. And none of those really tell the true story. I want to know when a customer goes to eBay in Mexico and types in your brand, what is the very first seller and content that they will be presented with that moment in time? Is that a good product or a bad product? That is really the litmus test for the experience that consumer is going to have. Not how many listings you shut down. That really does not at all speak directly to the goal that we have, which is creating, again, that really healthy consumer experience, building more brand equity, and in some cases, consumer safety. This is just an example of some of the threat level analysis that we've created. Again, different companies take different approaches to this. Ours is very much machine learning driven. You know, as your analyst within MarkMonitor is flagging content, taking actions, the system is taking note of that and learning from those decisions. And therefore, we'll begin to color code some of that content as it comes in so we can accelerate the decision-making process. And then lastly, really, is using business intelligence, whenever possible, to uncover market opportunities and target the most egregious offenders and networks that you're pursuing. I think this is critical. Again, there's a lot of different approaches to this. As long as it's part of your program and you're thinking about opportunities to do something offline, we think that's a good thing. You know, the internet is a symptom of a much larger problem. And in most cases, the bad guy isn't digital. He's a real person somewhere. So we want to get closer to the source of that problem. Business intelligence is really going to be the road that takes us there. We partner with as many different organizations as we can, and we encourage you as brand owners to do the same. Most of our customers are not only participating in events like this, but they're also meeting with, you know, the IPR Center on their own, or they're meeting with, you know, Amazon or Google or other platforms that are really important to their ecosystem. Having a voice in this community is really important if you want to be part of positive change. And collectively, we can create that level of change. So really quickly, I know I'm over time already, but I'm going to take 2 more minutes, Christy, if that's okay. I wanted to share with you guys a use case. So this was a customer of MarkMonitor's about a year or so, and we looked at a variety of different platforms for them. This is just one example. During that time period, you could see we were quite successful in shrinking the problem that they had on that particular platform in terms of counterfeit and gray market and bad content that was being served up. The customer, for a variety of reasons, no longer worked with MarkMonitor. You know, politics, budget, you name it, mergers, acquisitions, all sorts of reasons. And within less than a year, problem popped right back up. So vigilance is important here. If we take our foot off the gas, we absolutely see the problem grow in size and scope. So when we left the engagement, we were doing about 10 takedowns a day on iOffer, I'd say, give or take. A year later, it's about almost 100% counterfeits. So for us, this is real evidence that the consumer-centric approach works. It's not that this company wasn't doing brand protection for that year. They were doing it, a lot of it. They weren't doing it from a consumer-centric approach. So if you're spending all your time shutting down content of, you know, page 50 of an Amazon search, who's going to see or realize or feel the benefit of that effort? No one. No one. You'll put up big numbers, but you're not going to positively impact the consumer's experience. So, you know, in the end, what it's really all about is we're trying to turn on the lights a little bit. We want to stop doing brand protection in the dark, and we want to make a lot more intelligent decisions. So, with that, we are going to very quickly peruse the agenda here. First up, we've got a really cool conversation with Andy Abrams from Google, who's a senior trademark counsel there. And that'll be with Charlie Abrahams of MarkMonitor. Then we're going to take a quick break. Excuse me. Then we're going to talk to Mark Trachtenberg first. Mark's going to talk to us about email and social media-based attacks, something that he's been pretty focused on for quite a while. Then we'll take a break. Then we'll have a really cool conversation, which is going to be moderated by Richard Atkinson of Adobe with the president of MarkMonitor, Chris Vietor, and our VP of Product, Ricard Bandabo, who's fairly new to the organization. And so you get an opportunity to hear their perspective on our strategy, the products that we're building, and why some of the things like consumer-centric we believe are so important. We then have a session on piracy with Jane Sunderland, again, moderated by Charlie as well, to talk about some of the evolving issues that we're seeing in the piracy landscape. GDPR and Who Is with Staten Hammock, who is our VP of Policy and Industry Development. I'm sure that will be a well-attended event. Tons of implications for both the domain management space as well as online monitoring of all kinds, whether that's counterfeit, phishing, doesn't matter. GDPR is a highly relevant topic. Lunch, then some breakout sessions. And the domain breakouts, I believe, are upstairs. So if you go back out of this room and that bar area where we'll have lunch set up, there's a staircase there. And there'll be a sign pointing you in the way there if you're going to go and attend some of those domain-related breakout sessions. Martin Sutton, who I'm sure many of you know from the Brand Registry Group, is going to talk to us about the .brand landscape, the story so far, what potentially may be happening in the future there. Then we're going to hear from Tim from Salesforce, Lynn from Tailored Brands, and James from Backcountry, really about domain management, the success, the failures, the complexities, the risks that exist there for them, and they'll share some of their approaches and their thoughts. And then the last session, which I think will be really cool, are with Olga of PayPal, Ishmael from Microsoft. We'll, of course, allow them to introduce themselves when they come up. Holly Sample from MarkMonitor, from our services business, is going to actually moderate that discussion. And they're going to look at really limited resources. You know, you're a big company, you got big problems, you got limited resources. What's the approach that you're going to take to some of those complexities and issues? And then, of course, we'll have a cocktail reception, and hopefully by then we'll all be ready to go.